Good morning and welcome to you all to this two-day conference on unity consciousness. I'm extremely glad that I could be part of this two-day conference. No, but the slide is on the slide. No problem, no problem. The conference organizers have titled this conference as Cultivating Unity of Consciousness for Self-Transformation. The invitation for keynote has come just a few days before, and at that time I was at the Delhi conference, and quickly I have gathered some of my thoughts which I am planning to present before you. Well, let me get to the text message, and I will also be speaking in between. Let us begin addressing, taking stock of consciousness research, the present state of affairs, or what I would call the state of art. Consciousness studies preoccupy a sizable amount of philosophical space today in both Western and Indian philosophical circles. The corridors of the philosophy department world over resound with discussions and debates on theories of consciousness put forth by mind masters, neurologists, cognitive scientists, world metaphysicians, and above all, religious leaders. A visible hardship in the problem of consciousness, as you all know, is the difficulty that you will always have to be pitched within consciousness even as you try to understand or explain consciousness. There is no way that you can get out of consciousness to externally, objectively look at consciousness. You will always have to be placed within the consciousness in order to study consciousness. Current scientific paradigm holds that consciousness is nothing but an emergent property of the brain. This is the normal Western notion or prevalent notion on consciousness. And consciousness is something that arises out of our neurological activity. And mind is just located within the brain. So if consciousness is confined to the brain, automatically, normally, we will also have to presume that consciousness vanishes out, broken once death takes place. After death, there is nothing called consciousness that remains. So this typical eliminativism, as you would call it, is what is currently being prevailed in the name of consciousness research world over. And a closer look at their analysis would reveal that they have been led to such conclusions due to the third person perspective adopted. The Westerners have invariably taken up a third person perspective. And as I try to understand what is this computer, what is this podium, similarly what is consciousness? As the consciousness is something, stay outside. Like the name board or anything that you normally objectivize. The question is never, who am I? The inquiry is not about the person as the real subjective agency that we routinely in the Indian scenario meet. So I presume that it is this third person approach with regard to consciousness that has derailed, in a sense, the researches on consciousness in the West. Now, the whole lot of the research that is currently taking place in the name of consciousness can be put or summed up, placing it between, as a debate that is running between the reductionists on one hand and the non-reductionists on the other. For reductionists and neuroscientists, consciousness is nothing but an entity confined to the brain. While for non-reductionists, it is beyond our brain processes and cannot be reduced to mere brain function. So the dispute between the reductionists and the non-reductionists, championed on one side reductionists by Daniel Dennett and David Chalmers on the other hand, the non-reductionist group. So this debate that ran between Chalmers and Dennett was majorly pitched on the phenomena called qualia. Now what is qualia? Qualia is the subjective feeling that one gets as you have a subjective called qualia, which will not be able to get reduced to an objective entity. So it is this problem of qualia that made philosophers reduce consciousness as a pure brain function. Now, Dennett, who is representing the reductionist paradigm, he feels that consciousness need to be confined only to the brain, and the so-called qualia is something like a myth, a confusing idea, and therefore he would like to dissolve the problem of qualia as something incoherent. And he has in fact brought in a series of thought experiments. You know what thought experiments are? Thought experiments are, like in the lab where the scientists would do the physical experiments. The philosophers take or conduct what is called the thought experiments. So he has brought in a series of thought experiments to prove that qualia is something incoherent. David Chalmers, on the other hand, who is representing the non-reductionist group, he claims that understanding the genesis of experience from the neural signaling and networking is a hard problem. It is Chalmers who has coined this term called hard problem. In the Tuscan conferences in 1994, he has for the first time initiated this term hard problem, and in 2014, again in the same conference, he challenged the group of researchers consisting of scientists from various platforms, neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, the whole lot of them. He told them that, look, the hard problem remains a hard problem even after 20 years. It continues to be a hard problem, hard nut to break, as it were. However, but please remember that even the non-reductionists are not, a kind of mystics or something who would, immediately join with the Oriental type of thinking. They are also rooted on the scientific paradigm. However, let us concede the fact that significant progress has been made in unlocking the so-called hard problem. They have made significant progress in understanding what consciousness is. For instance, currently, with the support of the instruments, the consciousness researchers could predict, supposing I am thinking that I am standing at a crossroad, and with the support of the machine, they will be able to tell you exactly what you are thinking. So, significant advances have been made even in the empirical sense with regard to consciousness. That we will have to concede. So, probably it is this confidence which made them declare at the turn of the century that sooner or later the nature and the functions of consciousness will be fully fathomed by science, and neuroscience has even challenged or even warned philosophers to take their hands off consciousness. Don't lay your hands on consciousness, because there is hardly anything called philosophical in the subject called consciousness. It is purely a scientific exercise, and therefore you all can happily go home, take rest, and with regard to consciousness, leave that slot to us. We will take care of the studies in consciousness, and in another 50 years, consciousness will be fully visible and its functions will be fully visible for us. Unless and otherwise philosophers want to behave as if like, the self-appointed traffic police whom nobody would take care of, issuing orders which nobody cares. So this intellectual crowding around the problem of consciousness, in fact, leave little space for oriental metaphysical wisdom to intervene. Be it that of the Buddhist stream of studies in consciousness, or that of Vedanta. Now let me quickly have a glance at Buddhism. We have particularly, the idealists and the realist versions of Buddhism. The idealist strings of Buddhism, particularly the Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu, have made significant milestones in the evolution of the studies of consciousness, viewing the whole thing from a global perspective. The relativistic and the indeterministic language that Nagarjuna has employed while implementing his theory of consciousness, while putting forth his thesis on Shunyavada, in fact comes very close to the quantum theory of reality, which is one of the approach theories in contemporary physics. By this, I do not mean that Nagarjuna has anticipated all that is happening in modern science. That would be a naive claim. Nevertheless, we need to appreciate the logical acumen and the epistemological perfection that Nagarjuna could achieve. The Vedic tradition, when we come to the Vedic tradition, there are varieties of theories starting from Chataka, which is kind of eliminativism. You have the Nyaya theory, where self has been conceived as one of the object, one of the dravya, and moving on, you have varieties of theories which I would like to classify under two heads. One as the synthetic model of consciousness and the other the transcendental model of consciousness. Now what do I mean by these two types of research that is done in ancient India on consciousness? While the synthetic model conceives consciousness as a power, many of them call it as Chit Shakti in the experiential world, the transcendental conceives it as the locus, the foundation for all we phenomenally perceive. Note that there is incommensurability with regard to these two views, as Jane Mohan has pointed out. If there is incommensurability, because the questions they have posed were different. While the synthetic model of consciousness have asked a different question, they have asked what is it that we can do with consciousness, how the perfection of man and nature can be achieved, realizing the nature of consciousness. The transcendental model has asked a very different question. What is the nature of consciousness? They are not interested in the pragmatic exercises with which we could work out consciousness. What consciousness can do is not their question. They are surely interested in understanding the nature of consciousness. Now, Yoga school, Shakta tradition, Zen Buddhism, and some of the contemporary philosophers like Sri Aurobindo all seem to be fine examples for depicting the synthetic model of consciousness, while Advaita and Mahayana Buddhism are typically examples of transcendental street. Now, in what follows, I am going to pick up one representation from each model and analyze the mode of research that is being undertaken in the field of consciousness. Now, from the synthetic model, I have picked up the philosophy of Sri Aurobindo. Now, Sri Aurobindo's insight, as you all know, consciousness is integral to his conception of evolution. Sri Aurobindo's consciousness feels that consciousness undergoes devolution in matter and life, but in the matter, it is in the dormant state, in life, it is semi-conscious, and from the level of mind, you have consciousness fully exhibiting its original qualities. For him, any existence is not devoid of consciousness, because to exist is to have consciousness. So any agency, even this mind, has some form of consciousness, though in the dormant form. To exist is to have consciousness. Now, Chit is consciousness as part. Consciousness force is inherent in the matter, and therefore it can ascend. Since consciousness is inherent in this matter, there is this possibility for the ascendance of the conference and transform it into the higher forms of reality. There are many grades of consciousness higher than the mind. Like he speaks of several layers of mind, like higher mind, over mind, intuitive mind, inhuman mind, and super mind, so on and so forth. The definite stages through which the finite mind necessarily will have to pass through to reach up to the infinite level. Now, very significantly, Sri Aurobindo says that ordinary human range of consciousness no more exhausts all the possible ranges of consciousness. Just because I can confine my consciousness only to the room presently I am placed in, that doesn't mean that the capacity of consciousness is just confined. It would be like saying that all the gradations of color is what human beings are capable of seeing, or all the sounds possible are only that which human beings can hear. It will be as vain as clear as claiming it. You all know that there are several species in this earth which can see better colors or listen to better layers of sounds. Again, for Sri Aurobindo, to confine consciousness as a function of our physical organism, say brain, would be as vain as claiming that an engine causes or explains the power or steam or electricity. Just as the popular statement of Sri Aurobindo is that Just as an electric iron uses electricity, it is only using the part, neither that electricity is confined to the iron box, nor iron box produces electricity. Similarly, the brain neither produces consciousness nor consciousness is confined to the brain, because the force is always anterior. It is prior to the instrument. The instrument is posterior to the force. It is not the physical instrument that exhausts the possibilities of the power. Apart from this microcosmic mission of attaining perfection, there is also a cosmic mission of consciousness. The ultimate aim of spirituality is to perfect and transform life on earth into the life divine. Now, Sri Aurobindo has a cosmic vision for consciousness as well. All life is subconscious yoga of nature. He says that it is not prayer or any visibly spiritual activity that takes us ahead towards consciousness. He says that every aspect of activity of life can be consciously utilized as a means of spiritual progress. Now, I am trying to unearth those elements of non-local nature of consciousness that is visible in Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. Now, we have seen that Sri Aurobindo depicted the relation between consciousness and brain, and we have said that brain is only utilizing, or it is just a physical instrument for consciousness. And this also suggests that consciousness need not confine itself to the limitations of the brain. Footing itself in the instrument, consciousness footing itself in this instrument called brain, it can open up itself and communicates with the cosmic and the supracosmic planes. It is only habitual that human brain is accustomed to behave as a closed system with very little exchange from outside. In Upanishads, there are statements which popularly says that routinely we see through eyes, but any part of the body can be used as a visual instrument, because it is the master, the self, which is the real seer, to which I am coming to shortly. So it is presumed that neurons can, in addition, handle information from above through its cerebral cortex. The non-local nature of consciousness that emerges out from such discussions is to be studied seriously. Interestingly, this non-locality has an indirect sanction from the current scientific world as well. The remarkable feature of the microscopic world described by quantum theory is the idea of non-locality. What Einstein called the spooky actions, and Einstein was very happy about the indeterministic theories proposed by Heisenberg. And note that in the post-quantum era, contemporary physics has willingly abandoned certain classical concepts of physics, the mechanistic conception of physics believed to be fundamental to science. The notion of non-locality is in a sense implicit in quantum theory. Physicists were compelled to prove that quantum theory is non-local, for its wave functions cannot be exactly factorized into components representing the system's isolated and well-defined regions of space. This introduces an unchallengeable property of indeterminism by Heisenberg, and being very unhappy with this principle of indeterminism, Einstein, Badlowski and Rosen, is popularly called as the EPR thought experiment, try to prove that there cannot that a measurement of one particle cannot simultaneously affect the measurement of the second particle in a space-like separated region. That is, if a pair of protons are made to travel on the opposite direction, it is impossible that one proton in some way affect the motion of the other. This was the EPR thought experiment tried to prove. In physics, non-locality is the direct interaction of two objects that are separated in space with no perceivable intermediate agency. Students at the back, kindly maintain silence. In 1964, John Bell showed that Einstein's assumptions in the EPR thought experiment that correlates between paired photons over space-like separated regions could not possibly occur was a wrong assumption. The experiment showed that the correlations do in fact hold over any distance instantly or in no time. And physical reality is not, as Einstein claimed, a local reality. It is basically non-local in nature. Even the recent experiments conducted much later by Nicholas Dyson also proved the non-local nature of the universe. So with this distance experiment, it is proved beyond all doubts that the correlation between the paired photons did not get weakened even after increasing the distance between them to a considerable extent. This obliged physicists to conclude that non-linearity is a global dynamic of the light in the cosmos. These implications, this discovery, extend well beyond the domain of physical sciences and extend a new view of the relationship between mind and world, the relation between the mind and the thinking thing and the non-thinking agencies that you see in the external world, in an utterly different form that is been sanctioned by classical physics. New physics thus speaks of a fundamental connectivity of what appear to be widely unconnected aspects of nature, like the electromagnetism, light, matter, and gravitation, and thus points towards the most important secret of nature, as it were, that all this variety is a manifestation just of one basic substratum, a four-dimensional space-time continuum called quantum vacuum. Now, how this substratum arose and how it is endowed with all the intrinsic properties that it keeps exhibiting, science probably will never perhaps come up as a suitable answer. We will never find an answer from the quarters of science. It is time that scientists, from my view, my appeal is that I presume that we have scientists also here. It's time that scientists give up their inhibitions and are willing to expand their horizons to incorporate those disciplines that we use distinct methods. Probably for us philosophers we use distinct methods. But it's time that we join hands together and conceive knowledge as a synthetic exercise where a lot of disciplines join hands together and adopt those methods, or just have a close look at them. What are the methods that philosophers employ? Let us critically evaluate instead of shunning them, paying a blind eye towards it. Recently, I have been to Nalanda Dialogue when there were scientists from IIS, and we have had a very beautiful discussion on, for instance, the problem of causality. For instance, to confine brain as a wonderful instrument for information processing and decision making would be childish for the present century. It would be unwise to leave the brain just a complicated neural network or as an extremely advanced computer. It is here that creative approaches of a philosopher would be relevant. It's history that the possibilities of non-local consciousness has been explored in ancient India. We have had, our literature overflows with such instances, but then we have a habit of pushing everything as sheer myth. It's for us to decide whether we move forward to unlock the wisdom passed on to us as our heritage. Now what comes is the other model, the transcendental model of consciousness. Now this is more thick, theoretically concise, thick, and of greater philosophizing. Now Shankara, I have picked up the text Drishdrishya Vivek of Shankara, a Prakarana Grantha, which is in fact a text giving the recipe of how we can isolate the phenomenological residue, the real transcendental subjectivity from the complex phenomenal being called the Jiva. From an experiential position, Shankara argues analytically that it is the essential incompleteness of the empirical knowledge. I have seen this podium, I have seen this mic, I have seen this stairs, and what next? Even after exhausting multivarious objects in the empirical world, our quench or our thirst for knowledge has not been quenched. And that suggests that we are craving for something. We are in for a knowledge, something which will be satisfying, which is more meaningful. Upanishad mark that while the inquiry of empirical things are ordinary, the search for the real subject is extraordinary. Hence the text in Brihadaranyaka, Abhavare Drashtavyo Shrotavyo Mantavyo Nividhyasatavyo Maitri. Now there's Drashtavya, Prakashena Drashtam Yogya. That is what we mean by Drashtavya, that which has to be seen in a more significant fashion. Now, as we set out in search of the inquirer, the subject we find is a mysterious and complex entity that is having both the elements of the Drik and the Drishya. Jiva is a combination of both the seer as well as the seen. Now the task is for us to isolate the real self, the real brick, from this complex entity, the phenomenal entity. Now, what Shankara says, initially he tells us how the subjectivity becomes inwarded. He describes the empirical journey of the self towards the world, passing through the landmarks of the mind, senses, and body. This is how the self moves out. And while getting back, it is on the regressive one. We will have to come back from the very same route, away from the object, away from the senses, away from the mind, to catch hold of the phenomenal residue. And once you catch hold of the real self, the real transcendental subjectivity, then the inward journey gets terminated. As Yajnavalkya has famously revealed to Maitreyi, Navare Patihu Kamaya Pati Priyo Bhavati Atmanastu Kamaya Pati Priyo Bhavati. The objects that you seem to love in this external world are not meant for the external world. The real search, in fact, is for the self. It is the self quest that we have been exhibiting in our search for objective knowledge. Now, there are also other thinkers from the Western world like Wittgenstein or Husserl, who have also made this distinction between the empirical and the transcendental self. There are varieties of texts in the tradition that speaks about the general nature or the nature of consciousness, which is avyakrita, without namarupas, and which also functions, there are the transcendental and the immanent natures of consciousness. There are several texts that I have quoted, which I shall skip probably, and just speak about only one text from Mandukya, which speaks about the real nature. Of course, they are all in the negative terms, wherein speaking about the Chadurdha, Turiya state, says, the Kavi says, Na anda prajnam, na vahi prajnam, no bheda prajnam, na prajnanaghanam, na prajnam, na prajnam, adrishyam, avyavaharyam, agrahyam, alakshanam, achintyam, avyavadeshyam, ekatma pratyasaram, prapanchopashamam, shantam, shivam, advaidam, chadurdham anyante, sa atma, savijneyaha. I am sure there cannot be a better definition of consciousness than the one which the Mandukya has given. So, then let us come to the topic of today's conference, this alienation of the self. Alienation from the self, from our essential nature, has been the root cause for all the views that we have been confronting, the materialistic tendencies that we have, the outward nature of the self, and the incoherent doxas that we seem to carry within ourselves. As Jiddu has very famously said, that violence starts at the individual level. As we try to accommodate incoherent doxas within ourselves, violence emerges within the self, and the external violence is just an externalization of the internal violence that we keep doing. So, once this phenomenological factor that the transcendental, the real self, is distinct from the empirical self, has been even textually informed to the agents, then he will have a very drastic approach to the world, to the other self, as well as the nature. And I have argued that there can be actually two disasters that can happen to the individual. One is the disaster with the self-alienation. The other is the disaster of being alienated from Mother Nature. I don't have time to go through all those, but then I shall sum up, just pointing out that in India, social transformation has always been tried to attain through self-transformation. This is the Indian model, as this society also holds. So, if jnana is for karmardham, well, it is the individual, the vyashti, who will have to initiate his action, because samashti is only a myth. Trees are the real entities. The forest is something, a fiction. So, along with the scientific studies, I too believe that social transformation, through self-transformation is a challenge, and we will have to, as group of academics, will have to sit together, and it necessarily will have to be a transdisciplinary exercise. But remember that philosophy should be at the center. And I have also tried to bring your attention to the alienation away from the nature, and how in ancient India the self was always placed within the nature. The nature was never looked upon as an object, and therefore the modernist understanding of making the best use of the nature was never ever visible in our thought structure. And probably it is for this that the women and the nature were basically or fundamentally respected in ancient Indian culture. But in the name of modernity, in the name of bringing in the dictums of French Revolution, liberty, democracy, socialism, and the rest, we have in the busy exercise of modernizing ourselves, we have forgotten our basic foundational stones of our culture, and we got so alienated from the culture, from our own very essential nature. So now the task is to get back to the footings of our culture. Let the individual have its self-identity. Let the youth be returning to their parent or the foundational culture, lest they are not being isolated in their life exercises. So this exercise of cultural critiquing I have visualized as a philosophical pursuit. It is a wonderful job of a philosopher to unravel the golden threads these heritage seem to place that run through the length and breadth of one's life, giving it meaning, authenticity, rootedness, and above all, cultural identity. Thank you.